On the coldest night of the year, an elderly widow living alone opened her back door to find two freezing teenagers hiding behind her yard. She gave them soup, blankets, and a quiet place to rest, expecting nothing in return. They vanished by morning. 10 years passed. Then one snowy evening, a black luxury car pulled into her broken driveway. What stepped out would bring her to tears and rewrite everything she believed about forgotten kindness. What she once gave out of love was coming back bigger than she ever imagined. The wind howled like it was hungry that night, sweeping bitter cold across the peeling houses and cracked sidewalks of a forgotten street no longer marked on any modern map. At the end of that street stood a sagging porch, dimly lit by a flickering bulb that fought the dark like a stubborn memory. Behind the screen door, inside a kitchen warmed only by an old stove and the heart of a woman who had little left to give, Helena Ward stirred a pot of thin soup. She was a widow in her late 70s, bones creaking from age and arthritis, wrapped in 2 cardigans because the heater hadn't worked in weeks. The town had changed, the people had moved on, and those who stayed behind were like shadows stitched into winter. Helena, once a Sunday school teacher and hospital volunteer, now lived alone on social security checks that never stretched far enough, but she never complained, never expected, and never stopped believing in small kindnesses. That night, just as she sat down with her chipped bowl and stale bread, she heard something behind her house, a shuffle, a breath, a broken whisper in the wind. At first, she thought it might be raccoons, but when she peeked out the back door, she saw them, 2 teenagers, barely 16 by the look of it, huddled behind her trash bin, trembling in the cold with empty eyes and thinner jackets. A boy and a girl, strangers, lost, starving. She didn't ask questions. She didn't scold. She simply opened the door wider and said, "Come in before you freeze to death." That moment would bane itself into the deepest fold of time, though she had no way of knowing it. She served them her soup and split her bread in 3. They didn't speak much. The girl's hands shook when she held the spoon. The boy couldn't stop glancing at the window, as if someone dangerous might come after them. Helena never pressed. She gave them blankets, let them sleep on the floor, and watched them disappear by morning, leaving behind only a thank you note and 1 clean bowl on the counter. For 10 years, she never saw them again. She sometimes wondered if she had imagined them, if the hunger and the loneliness had painted ghosts on her porch. Until one crisp morning, when the trees burned red and gold and the air smelled of autumn, a long black car with tinted windows rolled up to her porch like it didn't belong on her street. It was polished, sleek, clearly expensive, so far removed from the rusted trucks and clunky sedans of her neighborhood that her first instinct was to check if someone had died. But when the engine cut and the doors opened, Helena dropped the watering can in her hand. Because stepping out weren't strangers, weren't politicians or preachers, but the same 2 faces, older, stronger, wrapped in coats that probably cost more than Helena's mortgage ever had. The boy, now a man with broad shoulders and calm eyes, stepped forward and said, "We've been looking for you for a very long time. Tell us where you're watching from, and stay with us, because the story Helena never expected was only just beginning." But the night she opened her back door would ignite a chain of events she wouldn't understand until a decade later. Helena's evenings had always followed a rhythm, quiet, deliberate, and rooted in memory. As the sun vanished behind the hills and the light inside her cottage turned amber from the flickering stove, she would wrap a scarf around her thinning white hair, step outside with a cracked old lantern, and gather what little firewood she could carry. The trees behind her yard stood bare and brittle in the cold, and every step crunched with frost as the season's first real blizzard whispered through the pines. Inside, her home was plain: 2 chairs, 1 bed, a small shelf of books that hadn't been opened since Walter died. She still talked to his photograph sometimes, told him what the clouds looked like, what was left in the pantry. Tonight, the wind didn't just howl. It pressed in like a warning. The storm had arrived fast, wrapping the neighborhood in a whiteout so thick it blurred the world into nothing. And then came the sound, not wind, not creaking trees, but something living. A breath, a murmur, a muffled cry. Helena opened the back gate with stiff fingers, her lantern quivering. That's when she saw them. 2 shapes crouched in the snow, half covered by a sheet of torn cardboard in each other's arms. The boy looked up first, shielding the girl with his body. "We're not here to steal," he said, jaw tight, voice shaking. "We'll go." "You'll freeze," Helena answered. "Come in before you lose your fingers." The girl couldn't speak. Her lips nearly blew. Her eyes flicked toward the warmth behind Helena like she was dreaming it. When they didn't move, Helena took a step closer and held out her hand. "You're safe here. I swear it on my husband's name." That made them pause. The boy, Jonah, was all sharp edges and distrust, the kind that came from protecting someone too long. The girl, Myra, trembled from head to toe but held onto her brother's coat like it was her lifeline. Slowly, they stood. Inside, she laid thick quilts near the stove, gave them soup from a pot meant for one, and poured them each a chipped mug of mint tea. She didn't ask too many questions. Not at first, but as their hands stopped shaking and the color returned to Myra's face, bits of truth surfaced like fragile stones from under snow. "We've been running," Jonah said finally. "Fussed a house. Things got bad." He didn't elaborate. Didn't have to. Helena simply nodded, placed another log in the fire, and said, "Then you can rest here. Just tonight." But as she closed the curtains against the storm, she had no idea the next night would bring another knock, and that her quiet, forgotten home was about to become something far more sacred. It started small, as most sacred routines do. The next night, even after Helena had promised herself they were likely gone, a soft knock tapped against her back door. The snow was gentler this time, but the cold sharper. She opened the door to find the same two teenagers standing there, faces red from the wind, eyes hesitant but hopeful. This time, they didn't refuse. Helena handed Jonah a cloth-wrapped bundle of leftover bread and stew without a word and offered Myra an old scarf she had once knitted in a hospital waiting room. No questions, no conditions, just warmth. That small moment grew into a ritual. Each night, just after the town fell silent and the streets emptied, the siblings would quietly return, and Helena would be waiting. She saved food for them, made a little extra, found old coats and stitched patches in them. Jonah, unasked, began shoveling her walkway, taking pride in leaving the steps clear by dawn. Myra, with her quiet grace, started restoring Helena's old books, gluing bindings, brushing dust, placing flowers between pages like bookmarks of memory. Over tea and flickering stove warmth, Helena told them stories of her late husband, of the kids she once taught, of the dances held in the school gym during spring. And for a while, the house that had known too much silence started to hum again. But peace draws eyes, and in a town as small and judgmental as theirs, quiet kindness often looks suspicious to bitter men. Mr. Brantley, her next-door neighbor, had always peered through his blinds like a watchman no one had asked for. The third time he spotted shadows leaving Helena's yard, he knocked on her door, red-faced and tight-lipped. "I saw them," he growled. "Teenagers sneaking out at night. Probably gang kids casing the houses. Don't tell me you don't know." Helena stood her ground, calm but firm. "They aren't what you think. Doesn't matter. This isn't a shelter. I'll call someone if I see them again." That night, heart heavy, Helena left a note outside the back door. "Don't come tonight. It's not safe. I'm sorry." But when she turned off the porch light, she heard the same quiet knock. When she opened the door, Jonah stood tall, Myra behind him. He held the note in his hand. "We don't have anywhere else warm," he said, voice steady, eyes not asking for pity, but something deeper. Trust. Belonging. Helena stepped aside. "Then come in, and we'll figure it out." What none of them realized was that the real danger wasn't the neighbor. It was something far older and far closer. The past they had tried to outrun was finally catching up. The fourth night came colder than the rest, and Helena lit the stove early, stirring the pot twice to keep it from burning. She set out 3 bowls this time, one more than the last, and folded a fresh towel for Jonah, who'd started drying his boots by the door like it was his own home. The house was still, but not silent. It had grown used to small sounds again. Myra's laughter when the kettle whistled too loud, Jonah's careful steps as he avoided creaky floorboards, the soft hum of 3 people learning to belong. But tonight, the knock never came. She waited by the window for an hour, then another. By midnight, the snow thickened and silence returned. Not the peaceful kind, but the empty kind that fills your throat and makes you pace. She pulled on her coat and checked the back gate, looked up and down the road, even called their names under her breath. Nothing. No footprints. No shadows. Just wind. She barely slept. By dawn, sirens echoed faintly from the edge of town, and she didn't hesitate. Heart pounding, she followed the sound down to the frozen riverbank where a small crowd had formed, police lights flashing like warning signs. And then she saw them. Not buddies. Not a tragedy. But Jonah and Myra, wrapped in emergency blankets, handcuffed to fear and misunderstanding. A police officer noticed her approach and explained, almost kindly, "We found them sleeping in an abandoned truck. They're being placed with social services. It's protocol." Myra's face crumpled as she saw Helena, reaching toward her like a child waking from a nightmare. "We didn't want to leave you," she cried, stumbling toward her before being gently pulled back. Jonah, quieter, older in that moment than any teenager should be, simply mouthed, "Thank you for everything." Helena wanted to scream, to demand they stay, to tear through the rules and paperwork with her bare hands. But she knew how the world worked. Knew that love didn't always mean permission. She watched them disappear into the back of the cruiser, their faces pressed to the window like war orphans. When she got home, she sat at the table with the 3 bowls still waiting. She didn't eat, didn't speak, just stared at the empty spaces they had filled so quietly, and broke, not with sound, but with silence. It was the first time in years that tears came, uninvited and unstoppable. In her heart, she believed she'd never see them again. But 10 winters later, on a morning just as cold but somehow softer, a car she didn't recognize pulled quietly into her driveway. And with it, the story began again. 10 years passed like snow melting slow on tired soil. Quiet, unnoticed by most, but deeply felt by the one woman who remained in the little house at the end of the road. Helena Ward had grown older, though she'd never say it out loud. Her steps were slower now, her hands stiffer, the ache in her knees more persistent on cold mornings. The stove still worked, barely, and the tea kettle still whistled like it had purpose. Her days followed a careful rhythm. Boil water, knit for no one in particular, read the same old books because new ones felt too loud, and rest when the light faded. Her pantry was modest, her income fixed, and her joys small. Watching bird from the kitchen window, saving the last slice of bread for the squirrels, remembering names of children she once taught, all grown now and long moved away. She never had children of her own. No siblings. No living family. Just faces from photos she kept in a dusty drawer and the memories of 2 teenagers who had left without a goodbye she could hold. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, she still found herself setting out 2 extra bowls without thinking, only to realize moments later and quietly put them back. The neighborhood saw her as that sweet old woman on the corner, rarely visited, always polite. She didn't mind. Loneliness becomes quieter when worn long enough. But one evening, just as the snow began to fall again and she swept her steps in steady, practiced strokes, a deep rumble broke the silence. Not a pickup, not a postman, but something smooth, powerful, unfamiliar. She straightened and blinked through the dusk as a black luxury car, polished like midnight glass, turned slowly onto her driveway. Its headlights dimmed, its engine cut. Helena clutched her coat tight and took a half step back, unsure, heart ticking a little faster. She expected a stranger to step out. Maybe a city official, or someone lost, or wise, someone selling promises. But the moment the doors opened, her breath caught in her chest. The car door clicked open with quiet finality, and from the passenger side stepped a tall young man in a sleek dark coat, polished shoes sinking slightly into the snow. He moved with the calm confidence of someone used to boardrooms, cameras, and fast decisions. A moment later, the driver's door opened, and a young woman emerged, graceful, elegant, her winter scarf a soft shade of lavender, her hands holding a carefully wrapped package. Helena narrowed her eyes, blinking in the pale light. For a long second, she didn't move, didn't breathe. These weren't teenagers. These were adults, accomplished, powerful, out of place on her little porch. But then the young man spoke, and the snow, the years, the distance between that night and this one melted all at once. "Mrs. Ward," he said gently, "it's us. Jonah and Myra." Helena's breath hitched. Her knees nearly gave. Her hands, stiff from age and cold, trembled as they reached toward faces that had haunted her memories. "No, it can't," she whispered, but her tears said otherwise. Jonah stepped forward and took her hand, warm, steady, real. Myra wrapped her arms around the woman who had once given her soup and a scarf and a floor to sleep on. "You saved us," Myra whispered into her ear. "You didn't know it, but you did." They led her inside, past the old door, back into the home that hadn't seen joy like this in a decade. Over tea, they shared their story. Jonah had co-founded a tech startup that exploded during the pandemic and was later acquired by a global firm. Myra, who had always drawn on scraps of paper as a child, had become a designer, her art now hanging in galleries across 3 cities. "But none of that," Jonah said, "would have happened without you." Myra placed the wrapped package on Helena's lap. "Open it," she said, smiling through misty eyes. Inside was a framed painting, soft, glowing strokes depicting a snowy night, a tired old woman handing bowls of soup to 2 scared children under the golden light of a stove. "It's the first night," Myra said. "The night you gave us hope." Helena's tears flowed silently as she traced the brushstrokes. But Jonah wasn't done. He stood, reached into his coat, and pulled out an envelope. "We heard about the taxes," he said, "and how the bank's been circling. We're here to change that." He placed the envelope in her hands, firm but kind. "This house, your house, is yours forever now." And just as Helena opened her mouth to speak, Myra touched her arm. "But wait," she said, eyes twinkling, "we're not finished yet. There's something else in the car, something you never imagined you'd receive." Jonah turned quietly, walked back through the falling snow, and opened the rear door of the car. Inside sat a large, carefully packed crate filled with fresh winter supplies, gourmet groceries, and comfort items wrapped in tissue. But more than that, on top sat a slim box of keys, thick official folders, and a carefully sealed envelope embossed in gold. He lifted them with care and brought them to Helena, whose trembling hands reached out as if unsure they were allowed to touch something this kind. Jonah knelt beside her. "We've taken care of everything," he said. "The house is fully yours, paid in full. No more threats. No more worry." Myra added softly, "We've also set up a fund. Monthly deliveries. Food, heat, repairs. Anything you need, we've planned for it." Then she placed a final document in Helena's lap, simple, symbolic, yet powerful, a record naming Helena Ward as their honorary grandmother in every future family document. Helena's hands flew to her mouth. Her shoulders shook as tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. Her voice cracked with disbelief. "I only gave you soup," she whispered, "and you gave me a life." Myra leaned in, holding both her hands tight. "You gave us warmth when we had nothing," she said. This is only a piece of what we could never truly repay." But what they left behind inside her home would become Helena's most treasured reminder. A few weeks later, Helena stood before her fireplace with care in every breath, her aged fingers gently lifting the frame as she hung it above the hearth. The painting, soft and warm even in its stillness, captured that long-ago night, her younger self offering soup by candlelight, 2 trembling teenagers wrapped in blankets, their eyes wide with hope and hunger. Visitors occasionally asked about the artwork, drawn in by its gentle light and emotion. Helena would just smile, her gaze lingering on the memory, and say, "It's a reminder that no kindness is wasted." The fire below crackled softly, mirroring the warmth that had once filled her kitchen, and now stretched quietly across 2 full lives, entwined by compassion. The camera lingers on the painting, Helena's hands reaching, the flicker of flame, the silent promise passed between souls who needed each other without knowing how much. If this story moved you, or reminded you of someone you love, like and subscribe to hear more stories that show how kindness comes full circle.